Yeah, what we're kind of discussing today just has to do with if you're working on long form, if you're working with daily, and in particular, if you're planning on turning over a project to do final sound work outside of the Adobe Suite, if you're planning on doing final color outside of the Adobe Suite, there's kind of some best practices to be aware of. This is one of those cases that there's like a million different ways to handle things like syncing audio and picture together, handling metadata within Premiere Pro and within tools. But when you start needing to go outside and work with interchange file formats, there are some best practices that we recommend. And this will just save a lot of hurt and a lot of hassle at the end of the broadcast, or at the end of the process. We end up running into issues where you turn over audio to a sound engineer and they suddenly say, hey, I lost all the metadata on all the clips. I'm not getting what I need to relink to the original source file. Or you hand off to color and they come back and say, hey, we have no idea what color was used on the dailies. I have to start over from scratch. We don't know what LUTs for you, what CDL value for you. Those are just some common problems that we run into in the final part of the process. A couple of tips and tricks that we just want to kind of talk a little bit about and see if you guys have run into any of these. We will be taking questions at the end, so feel free to jump in with chat questions, and we're going to have those magically fed to us near the end of the webcast here. But with that, I can just, Zach, you want me to just go ahead and jump in?
Yeah, please.
Okay, awesome. So to get started, just something that we do typically run into is just dealing with and handling metadata correctly. And Premiere Pro and the Adobe suites are actually built around an open standard for metadata, something called XMP, and it's used in a wide range of different industries, including photography and medical imaging. It's not something that's really been adapted by a lot of the post and finishing houses. And there's an older standard for dealing with metadata that puts all the metadata in sort of a spreadsheet, a self-contained file called an ALE file. So this is, it originated with Avid, and it's something that a lot of people don't know, that Premiere actually supports both exporting an ALE file and importing an ALE file. Now, if you just bring in media, and I'll just grab one of my dailies clips here and just go ahead and drop it into my project. The first thing that you'll notice here is the file name comes across and it just has a, the name of the clip on disk. So I get that A001, C001. Wouldn't it be nice to have like an actual file name that represented what this was in the production, like maybe scene and take information? Yeah. The other thing about this is any other metadata, you're kind of beholden to the file format and what was added in here. So I did get a tape name, I didn't get descriptions or log notes information, additional metadata information that can be an important thing like things like sound time code, if there's a time code offset between the picture and the sound, if they weren't jam synced together with the identical time code. That type of metadata isn't going to come through automatically. So one of the things that we do recommend, a lot of places who do dailies include with the dailies a little file called an ALE file. And you might actually be working with dailies and see this .ale file included with the actual picture and sound files and say, oh, I don't need that, I don't need to deal with it. That's actually a treasure trove of metadata information that can be generated by a DIT and handed off to you. So if you're not using the ALE file now, you should get in the habit of using the ALE as sort of the first step of ingesting your dailies. Really quickly, what an ALE file looks like. Nice bright spreadsheet looking thing here. This top section here is
Carl, can you punch in on that actually?
Yeah, I can just do a quick punch in on the upper corner here so that you can see this.
Awesome.
This upper section is the heading, and this actually is a tab delimited text file. So it's a human readable file. You can actually open this up in Excel and make changes to it. You can open it up in a text editor and make changes to it, although it's going to look like this. It's not going to quite be as organized. But I can immediately see that the clips actually have names like, there's 2 different tone poems that are being read in these dailies. There's one called Dreamers and one called Greatness. And I can see that the human readable names are listed here, as well as the names on disk, the tape names, as well as additional metadata information. If I scroll across here, you'll see that there are columns here for comments and notes, creaky stairs, buzz on boom. And then these number values at the end here are actual color values. These are CDL values. And there's also columns for things like LUT names. And these, again, really, really important if I need to hand that information off to a colorist. So what this means for Premiere is if I start by importing the ALE file, I'm just going to drag it from the media browser and drop it in. You could do this from a Finder window or an Explorer window. What comes in is a set of basically containers. All the metadata comes in, those log notes come in, the tape names come in, and again, I get human readable file names as opposed to those big long names of the clips on disk. So I don't have to go in and manually rename these things. There is one additional step if you use this process. You do have to link the media. Premiere doesn't automatically link to the clips, but if you already have your dailies and you know where those are found, typically that's something that takes 1 step here. So very quickly, I'll just come into my media folder. I've got the display only exact name file matches checked, so it's going to find the 1 clip that matches the first clip that needs to be mapped to, and boom, it's done. So it makes for a much better process. And again, all of this metadata information becomes important at the end of the workflow. Not something you need at the beginning of the workflow, but if you don't do it at the beginning, it becomes much more difficult to add this later on. So that's why we do recommend doing it at the first step. The other thing that an ALE workflow provides for is the ability to update the metadata information. I can actually export metadata from Premiere. I could select all the clips here and choose File, Export, and save out to the same file format. This will generate the exact same ALE file format. If I need to get these clips into another application with the metadata intact, or if I just want to export all the metadata and edit this in a text editor. I could hand this off to somebody not running Premiere Pro, a production assistant or something, to say, hey, add some additional metadata in the following areas. The other thing that this also enables is the ability to update the files from an updated ALE file.
That's awesome.
So yeah, common thing. You probably run into this yourself, where
absolutely.
You get into the workflow and suddenly realize, I'll go ahead and expand on this. In fact, let me bring open another column here.
Yeah, I mean, like maybe some of the metadata didn't get pruned properly or entered properly during the dailies process while you're on set. Post calls and says, hey, we don't have circle take information in the notes, and we usually do. Can we get a new ALE spit out, and we'll need to update those, right?
Exactly, exactly. So I'm adding a couple of columns here for some color information. So these are the CDL values.
Yeah, that's another one for sure.
As well
hey,
as...
Can you do another grade on this?
Yeah, exactly. So as soon as I do that, you'll see that some of these values come across, but there's a lot of clips that are missing the CDL values. And there's also a number of clips that are missing the LUT name. Now, the way we handle LUT metadata is you can apply a LUT over in Lumetri, but if it's not in your project, if it's not in this, the name of the LUT isn't in this column, certain workflows are not going to export that back out. So if I want to take a project where I've got a sequence and I'm going to send that off for final color, one potential workflow is to use an EDL file. And we do have a checkbox for including CDL values and LUT names, but if it's not in your metadata in your files, it's not going to get passed across. So I can see here that none of the LUT names have been passed across on these clips. So what I'm going to do is actually, let me just select everything again. And I'm going to go to Clip. There's a menu choice here called Update Metadata. And if I use that update metadata function, I have to unselect my sequence. 1 second here. So I've got, there it is, there's my test sequence. So let me just select everything, Command or Control click to unselect that. And now I can use the update metadata command. I have an updated ALE file with the color values, with the LUT information. I can go ahead and select that and hit open. And when I do that, you'll see that that automatically populated this LUT column over here. I now have, I can see that some of this footage was shot on an Alexa, and I can see that there is a LUT name that is associated with the LUT that was baked into the dailies. So really, this is about getting the information that's baked into the files and kind of storing it in a metadata value so that even though from an editing standpoint, the editor never needs to touch this information, they're never going to go back to this information, but it really, really is important when I need to hand off the edit to do final color. And that's one of the reasons why we recommend doing this. Okay. Now you may note, looking at these files, again, picture and sound are stored in separate files. So we need to do something about that. Again, a lot of different ways to merge picture and sound. Premiere's got a function called merge clips that works great if you're delivering to something like YouTube or you're going to do your final sound mix.
But it kind of limits you down the road, right? Yeah, yeah. The problem with merge clips is it creates a new clip reference that is sort of baked together. And so metadata that was found in the original source media doesn't always pass through in a merged clip. So we actually recommend using multicam. Even if you're shooting single camera, use multicam to sync picture and sound. And we do some extra work on the back end to ensure that multicam does the right thing, regardless if you're shooting on one camera, 2 cameras, 5 cameras, it doesn't make a difference. We kind of do some extra work for the audio turnovers to ensure that the right thing happens on the back end. So I guess the best way to think about it would be that multicam is a different workflow entirely. It's not just like, oh, right click and merge clip and multicam do the same thing. You actually split your paths there, and you want to go down the multicam path especially if you're working in an ecosystem where you know, you're going to need to hand this off to somebody else, like a sound editor or something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. It also saves you a lot of time in the just in your dailies process as far as prepping these files are concerned, because multicam has batch processing built into it. So as an example of this, I'm going to go ahead and again select everything. I'll just go ahead and deselect the sequence here. But I want to create a whole range of multicams here, and I've got multiple takes of each of these different shots. I've got an A camera and a B camera. And again, I'm seeing that because the clip names actually represent that thanks to the ALE file. But what I can do as far as merging these together, I'm simply going to, oops, I clicked in the wrong spot. I think after all these years, I would stop doing that. There we go.
Habits, right?
I'm going to right click on this group, and I'm going to choose Create Multi-Camera Source Sequence. Okay. Now, when I do that, I get this dialog box comes up on the screen here. And this dialog box, there's a couple of sort of hidden things to kind of be aware of that this dialog box will do for you that are going to save you a bunch of time. The first thing is kind of down in the middle under Audio Sequence Settings. Leave this set to Camera 1. You've got choices for switch audio, all cameras. Camera 1 has something sort of magical built into it, where if some of the clips that you've selected are audio-only WAV files or AIFF files or any other type of audio files, it automatically assumes, oh, we've got audio-only clips in the groups. We want, the editor must want those files. It'll automatically mute any camera audio. It'll automatically deselect any additional audio in the files. Now, those audio tracks from the camera are actually still in the group, but they're muted, so you'll never hear them. You never have to deal with them unless you want to. And I'll show you how you can go in and you can actually edit a multicam, which is another big benefit of working with multicam. The other thing to note, if you're syncing based on timecode, or even sound timecode. And again, getting that sound timecode offset in there is dependent on using an ALE at the beginning of your workflow. But if you're syncing based on timecode, the multi-camera generator will actually create different multicam groups for each of the pairs or each of the groups that it sees. It's not going to create one gigantic multicam with everything in it. It's going to create individual multicam files for each of the matching sets of files that it sees.
Very cool.
So in addition to this, the only other little bit of change that I make to this is I usually click on use clip names, just because that way the clip name is actually passed through into the multicam group as the main file name. And then I'll do something like down here, let's see, we'll choose video clip name, and then I also will add some sort of appendage to this. Multicam is fine. MC is another common one that's being used. Now, if you don't have matching timecode and you don't have the sound timecode brought in as metadata, you can sync in Premiere based on other methodologies like audio. Maybe, Zach, remind me, maybe we'll show clip markers.
Yeah, that would actually be really great. Just because sometimes, on the day in the shuffle, maybe a battery goes out on the, locket box or something like that, and timecode's drifting, and suddenly you need to hop over to another method. It's really nice to be able to know how to like hop in and change those things when you need to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with this selected, oh, there's one other thing here. I'm going to check this box, make sure it's checked for move source clips to process clips bin. By doing this, it's going to actually create sort of like a subfolder, and it's going to move everything that it lined up into the subfolder, and everything that it couldn't line up, it'll leave in the root of my selection. So it's just kind of a nice way of sort of knowing what did it line up, what did it fail to line up.
Yeah, that definitely comes in handy when, especially if you're not batch syncing, right? Like if let's say you don't have timecode, and you're trying to sync individual pairs of files by marker, right? By the ways that we'll show in a minute. It can be nice to just move those to the process bin, and you'll see what that looks like in a minute. So that way you can kind of keep track of the files that you've already made a subclip for.
Absolutely. In fact, let's go ahead and see it right now. So I've got everything is in my project bin at the root level right now. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And you can see right away it's created a whole series of multicam groups. I've got a little bit of an error message here on the screen. It lets me know if it couldn't synchronize any of the clips. It'll just give me this little message. That's not a end of the world type of error message. In fact, in this situation, I can now go in and look, and I can see all of my multicam clips have been generated with the exception of greatness B-roll. Oh, I didn't have sound for any of the B-roll shots. So this is actually as expected. It's taken and moved everything else into this process clip folder, so it was able to find matches for everything that you find here. All of my take 1, take 2, take 3, A and B cameras, all my sound rolls, it's managed to line up in one quick pass, and it was able to do that in seconds. So that's the real benefit of doing it in this way. Now, if I were to go in, if you need other methodologies for doing synchronization, let's see, that's 03. So let's just say I want to sync camera 3 here, a different method. I'm going to just select these two clips individually. Again, go to create multi-camera source sequence. If I didn't have timecode to synchronize by, or sound timecode as metadata, there's a couple of grayed out options down here at the bottom. One is for audio. So if you do have scratch audio on your camera tracks, you could actually use that to synchronize to picture. I do recommend doing this one group at a time rather than trying to do it all at once.
Yeah.
The challenge is, particularly if you have multiple takes, the audio is so similar, Premiere might get really confused and say, oh, all 6 of these shots of Dreamers are all, have the same audio. So I'm just going to try and align them. Even though the waveforms are actually slightly different, it's going to try to align them. So
plus it's a lot of audio to process. I mean, when you batch process that, it has to inspect every single waveform and then kind of generate that fingerprint to compare. And so it's just better to kind of keep it limited to the scope of what the software is looking at.
Yeah, exactly. Now, if you don't have sound if you don't have a scratch track to deal with, there is also the option of syncing based on clip marker. Now, this is as primitive and as basic as it gets.
But super useful.
Yeah. So in the idea of this, what I can do, I'll go ahead and cancel out of this window here, is I would start by loading up my sound clip and finding the exact frame where the marker claps. I'm just kind of going to eyeball this based on the waveform here. And I can drop in a clip marker at that point. And then I can come into...
And that's, you just use the M key shortcut, right?
Yeah, the M key. Then I can come in here to, here's Dreamers 3A. Again, load this in the source monitor. And we can do the exact same thing. Find, I'm being too precise here for webinars, but let's.
All right, you're grade A.
Right there.
I appreciate your diligence.
And then again, here's the marker button, or M for dropping in the marker. And so now that I have a marker on each of these, I can select these two, right click, and say create multi-camera source sequence. And now, hey, look, it's ungrayed out. I can select clip marker and just use the unnamed marker feature. One last little tidbit with this, if you're working in a production environment where there are already markers applied to these clips, or somebody has already gone in and done a bunch of clip markers on your files, just give the markers a common name. Like go into, when you create the marker, double click on it and go in and call it Sync 01 or something like that, and make sure the naming is identical for sound and picture, in which case you can select that as the clip marker. That option will show up in this panel here as well.
Awesome.
So once I do that, I click OK, and it will do the synchronization. This is the multicam that it just created based on that sync point with just the single camera. And again, I can treat this as a video clip. I can double click on it. You can see that the waveforms are moving up and down. So I've got the waveform, and I can double check the sync in this manner. Now, the other thing that you can also do with a multicam that you can't do as easily if you use merge clips. We have opened up some of this, but it still can be a bit challenging, is when you're working with a multicam, you have the ability to open it as a timeline view. And this is something that Premiere has had for many, many, many years, but it gives me the ability to actually see the offsets between picture and sound, and I can take either of the cameras and actually nudge them one direction or another if the sync, sometimes you get timecode drift.
Or you didn't get it quite right when you set the markers, if you're syncing manually, or any number of reasons why you might have to do a small adjustment.
Yeah, and so this gives me the ability to make sure that everything is actually lined up appropriately. At any point, I can dive into a multicam group and view it in a timeline view. We basically stack A1, or camera A, camera B stacks on top of each other. If I had a camera C, it would be a third video track in the list here. If I had camera audio, that camera audio would also show up here in the timeline, but the mute button would be on for the camera audio tracks, so that it's still in there. If I needed to, I could mute something else, and I could unmute the camera scratch track if for some reason that's the only usable piece of audio. Hate for that to happen, but it happens. So again, it's something nice to know from just a troubleshooting and a fix the problem type of perspective.
Absolutely.
As far as cutting in is concerned, when you're cutting in from a multicam group, the one little caveat to be aware of, Premiere has this concept of being able to load sequences in the source monitor. And whether you want to cut those in as a nest or you want to cut in the original source media is dependent on this little button up here. It's kind of just above the, or just below the hours indicator on the time code. So right here. You want to make sure this button is not highlighted, it's not blue when you're cutting in a multicam, because by doing that, it's going to give you
the subclip instead of the individual media, right?
Yeah, so
perfect.
Like if I turn this on right now, I may have this backwards. This happens on occasion here. If I have it on, when I drag and drop this in, it's giving me the multicam. You do want it on. I said off, I meant on. Happens. So by doing this, it's going to keep this as the multicam group itself. And again, if I have sync on, it'll treat this as a single clip. I can move it around and treat it as a single file.
Hey, Carl.
Yeah.
What if I don't want all that audio to come in all at once?
Good question. So one of the things that you can do by doing this, you can see the audio files that we have every microphone. So this was shot with 4 or 5 different microphones on set from different angles.
And I think, if I remember correctly, the sound guy probably put the mix down on track 1, and then the rest are ISOs?
Exactly, exactly. So what I can do, and this is something that you can actually do it in a group, is by going in to your project bin, selecting the files.
Moving my head so people can see.
And right-clicking, there's an option to modify audio channels. Now, when you do this, you're going to get the option. Let me do it one more time where I don't have my sequence selected. There we go. Modify audio channels. So when I do this, you can see here are the 5 audio channels. I can just change this from 5 tracks to 1 track. And I even have the ability at this point to pick which audio track passes through. So if A5 was actually the mix and 1 through 4 were the ISOs, I could actually take care of that right here, right now.
Awesome. And that doesn't delete any audio. It just prevents it from carrying along into, exactly right.
Yeah, so it makes the multicam group. So now if I take one of these and double click on it, let's just scrub through so I have picture. When I drag and drop it, only one of those audio tracks comes through. You'll notice the waveforms continue to pass through as well. So everything is working appropriately. Now, if I did need to go back to, let's say, another audio track, like instead of A1, maybe I need A3, A4, something like that. The microphone got tapped or brushed at one point. We want to use a different microphone.
Switch to the boom for a second or something.
Yeah. The key here is, first off, make sure that you're only selecting the audio track when you do this. I'm just turning off the link selection button, but you could also hold the Alt or Option key to do this. And double click on the audio track. This is going to bring you into the multicam group itself. And then hit the match frame button. So I'm on the default one for Premiere is F. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit F. But if you've mapped match frame to something different, that would be the keyboard shortcut to use. And you'll see that all of the audio tracks now show up in the source monitor. And if I go back to my sequence, I have the ability to bring in any of those isolated microphones. So if I wanted, let's say, A3, and I wanted to put A3 on A2, I would have the ability to do that. And now I can just hit, let's see, we'll turn that off. I'll just make sure everything is set up the way I want it, and then hit overwrite. Oh, I had A2. Oh, let me do that one more time.
It'll also come in from your playhead.
So from there, again, we'll hit overwrite. And you can see it's now dropped part of the A2 in at the appropriate spot. Oh, you know what's going on? I'm looking at this going, that's not right. There's something not right here. Obviously, I didn't mark an in point here, so it was bringing it in from the very beginning. There is actually, and this is kind of a little add-on here, there is actually a new preference. And I believe this is under timeline. Match frame sets in point. I've gotten so used to this, I forgot to turn it on.
That's awesome.
But if by turning this on, and this especially for people who are coming over from Media Composer to Premiere, it mimics that behavior a little bit more, so that if I match frame into a clip, it's going to automatically select that in point marker for me.
That's where you're going to want to work from, exactly.
Because that, yeah, exactly. So I'll go ahead and make sure hit OK. I'll go ahead and punch back out. And if
I was going to say, if you pick a new spot in the clip, maybe.
Yeah. So once again, let's just repeat that whole process here so that you can see it. Right here is where the bump happens. Again, I'm going to double click on the audio track, hit match frame, and you can see it's automatically dropped in the in marker. And then I can say, you know what, I want A4. Let me go back to my sequence here. Now that I've got the right thing selected, I want A4, and I want A4 dropped in down here. And I'll go ahead and hit overwrite. and it does the correct thing for me.
Perfect.
So that's, yeah, just, you know, kind of a nice thing to know about if, as an editor, if you just want to work with the scratch track initially, or the mix track initially, and you want to be able to punch into those ISOs later on, by doing your dailies in this way, it gives you that flexibility and that power. All right. I'm trying to think of any other questions or any other things that I can show today, but that was kind of what I just wanted to get that information across. Yeah. Use multicam.
Yeah, absolutely.
Use multicam. It's going to save you. In fact, yeah, I can actually take a moment here. If I have a sequence using multicam, let me go ahead and choose to export.
I was going to say about flattening and seeing what that looks like.
That would be really good.
Taking us kind of through the end of that.
So first off, for color purposes, if I choose to export out an EDL, there is a checkbox to include the CDL values and the LUT information. Now again, this information gets pulled from those metadata columns. So it's important that it was added in the first place, or that it was added in later on. But by doing this, when I hand off the edit to a colorist, they can immediately say, oh, the dailies that they were working with have this LUT and these CDL values baked in. And this supports multiple LUTs. There's up to 3 LUTs per clip can be supported as metadata. There's 3 different LUT columns. Mm-hmm. So you could have a show LUT, a scene LUT, as well as the CDL values, and have all of that metadata pass through when you're handing it off for color. The other thing to note, let me just zoom back out here, is when I choose to export out for sound, first off, we recommend AAF. We've been working very closely with the Pro Tools team to ensure that our AAF goes into Pro Tools correctly. I've worked with the teams doing sound turnovers to some of the large houses, and there is a process in place for doing this. Now, the key thing with this is if you use multicam, the AAF exporter has sort of a built-in flattening function, which will automatically take any of these multicam groups and flatten them back down to the original source media. It goes really, really quickly. You have to look on the screen very fast. When I do this, it's simplifying project. There's a little dialog box that comes up for a split second. It says simplifying project, and that's where all that automatic flattening happens. So at this point now, I can actually go through and export out to AAF, and all the sound roll information, the original source media information, the metadata will pass through with the AAF file. One last little tidbit: when you are going out to AAF, it's very common to do multiple AAF exports. We do recommend using separate audio if you're doing this multiple times, because what will happen is if you save an AAF to a folder, you'll end up with the AAF file itself and multiple stems, all the different audio clips get saved out along with that. The beauty of this is Premiere will actually recognize what audio already exists in that particular folder. So if you make a change to the edit or something, as long as you're still working with those same audio files, when you save a second AAF file, it's going to go way faster. Simply because
the differences.
Yeah, it just looks, it sees if there's anything that's missing, it'll render out that audio for you, but otherwise it's just going to link to the same audio that already exists in the folder. So awesome. It's just a lot faster.
It's super useful tip.
Cool. Well, hopefully this will save some time and effort with some of the assistant editors out there. Again, please spread the word. Use multicam. You know, other syncing methods, you know, again, they work great. It's, you know, kind of like one of my coworkers, Mike Canfer, likes to say there's a maze of doors when it comes to production sometimes. And if you go in the wrong door at the beginning, you're not going to be able to get to the right door at the end of the workflow. And so this is one of those methods of making sure you go in the right door at the beginning.
Karl, thanks for getting all that out. And thanks for joining us today.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, guys.